this video, we're going to take a look at how to create mounts. Now, a mount is kind of a catch-all term for basically a collection of different weapon records. So mounts can have just sensors, and mounts can have combinations of weapons or sensors, or they can have just weapons on board as well. So let's go ahead and click on mounts. So mounts are going to be handled the exact same way as everything else so far. We simply take an existing mount, make a copy of that mount, and then we go ahead and make any adjustments to it. There are a couple little quirks that make mounts a little difficult, however, and that is going to be dealing with things like the magazine capacity as well as anything that is included on board. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new mount based on our weapon that we created last time. So I'm going to take this 120mm cannon, and I'm simply going to go up to Add-ins, Command, go ahead and copy the intro. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change its name. We'll call 125 to a 46M cannon. We'll make a quick little comment here. This is from a T-72. And we're going to go ahead and define any sort of armor that it has on board. In this particular case, it has a special armor because it's a tank, so it's going to be fairly strong. To the right, we have the mount's rate of fire. In this case, is 5, so that's going to be 1 shot every 5 seconds. This particular system is known to be able to fire up to 20 shots per minute. 60 divided by 20 is going to be a little bit quicker, but again, that's also needs to be aim shots. The next item we have is how many weapons are actually carried on this mount at any given time. In this particular case, we're holding a total of 40 individual shots. Now keep in mind, we haven't adjusted any of this down here, so this is something we want to kind of think about. Think about this as the ready ammunition for it. Now we happen to know that they only have 37 rounds. The rate of fire simply refers to how fast they can pull items out of the magazine and load it directly into here. In this particular case, we don't have anything special as far as this goes. We're not going to worry about this because all the ammunition is not something we need to pull out of a different part of the tank. We also have the ability to do fully autonomous, which simply means it's something that can work on its own. Local control, in the event we lose some kind of a director. We have the ability to preserve targets. We can have hot reload, which simply means it can pull things out of a magazine quickly. And we can also do a trainable mount, which simply means we can point it in any direction we need. Our next item is going to be any sort of cargo that we have. In this case, our cargo is considered large cargo. We have the total mass, we have the total cargo area, and how many troops it takes up. In this case, it's only going to be taking up 3, because again, this is going to be basically our T-72, if you want to think about it another way. We can also define whether or not that cargo is paradroppable, whether it is hypothetical. So now things are going to get a little bit tricky. Coming down here, I notice we have a bunch of mount weapon records. In this case, they're all 120mm. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to get rid of the first 2 because we're not going to need them. And we're also going to go ahead and take the one at the top. We're going to replace it with the one that we did a little bit earlier on. Now remember, we had created a special weapon just for the purposes of this. Now I notice there's some from before, but we're actually going to take advantage of the one that we developed ourselves. Now note, no matter how much we look through all the different options here, we don't see the option that we created. We just have a bunch of these things. That's because instead of seeing weapons, we're actually looking at what they call weapon records. A weapon record is basically, if you want to think about it, one complete package. So if the 125mm shell is the weapon, the gun that shoots the 125mm and carries a certain amount of shots is going to be the weapon record. So we're going to go ahead and double click right here, and we're going to have to create a new weapon record. In this case, I'm just going to make a copy of the one right up at the tippy top here, and we're going to go ahead and do what we always do. So we're going to go ahead and call this just like we had before, 125mm to a 46 meter and AP. Yeah, there it is. So there is our example weapon right there. So now what we can do is we can define the default load, in this case 37, and we can define the max load, which in case is 37, and that the rate of fire is 5. It is critical that these values agree. Otherwise, we could have issues later on. We'll now make a copy of that particular mount number. We'll go ahead and close this one out. And we'll go back over to our mount itself and simply replace this one directly. Now that we've done that, we'll quickly save everything. Go back over to our mounts. And now if you take a look, you'll notice that we have a mount weapon record, which has 37 out of 37 shells, meaning we're only carrying AP. And we know that all of our values agree with each other, which is very critical, because if these have different rate of fires, it's going to affect how effectively this particular one works. Now the next thing, and this is where it's going to get a little more complicated, is remember this mount, consider this like the turret. If this is the gun, this is the turret that holds the gun. So we also have the ability to go ahead and do things such as attach sensors to them. In this case, we have a generic gun director, which we can go ahead and get a slightly more modern version. We'll go ahead and grab the 3rd generation. We have LLTV. We'll go ahead and might as well upgrade that as well. We have a generic laser rangefinder. It actually works pretty well for us. I don't feel like we need to change that too much. And of course, we have an interesting new problem. Now, if you remember a little while ago, we gave this weapon the ability to fire at helicopters, which means any sort of gun director that we have also has to be capable of engaging air targets. So in this case, if we want to be a little bit simple here, we can type in generic, and we can actually pick a basic sight for the purposes of just engaging gun targets. In this case, if we just want to do one of these, we can simply say anti-air and surface. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to change this initial property to be anti-air and surface, change this one to be anti-air and surface, and I'm also going to make sure, of course, this one is also going to be anti-air and surface. And you can have the ability to add a generic 2D search radar, which I think is a little excessive for our little tank here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of that platform because we don't need it. We also have the ability to go ahead and have any sort of directors. Think about our sensors as our sensors. Think about our directors as our directors. They're basically going to be dictating where the guns are pointed. If anything bad happens to our director, we may completely lose the ability to fire the weapon unless it has local control capability. In this case, we can take a look at everything we've had from before. Now, it is possible to actually create different directors than sensors, but in this case, we'll keep it pretty simple and just use the same directors as we used for our sensors. It simply means if one goes, they all go kind of a situation. So we'll go ahead and say, we'll make sure this is exactly the same way as we had before. We have generic gun detector, just checking it out real quick, making sure anti-air and anti-surface is the second one from the bottom. Looks good. And we have everything all set. We have our laser rangefinder and everything is ready to go. Now keep in mind, if this particular mount had a communication, for example, I'm launching a guided weapon that is command guided, you could put that down here as well so it could talk to the particular unit that it is firing. The next thing we're going to take a look at is our mounts that we can go ahead and engage. In this case, we're a main battle tank, so we can engage in all the directions, and our mount is trainable, meaning we can quickly and efficiently move it in all directions rather than having to move the entire vehicle in order to take a shot in a different place. So we have our weapon record, we have our sensors, we have our directors. We have no magazines on board this particular tank. Now, if we wanted to, we could add a special magazine holding special shells in here just for the purposes of being able to load them directly in here if we needed to. Otherwise, this particular weapon record, and mount is now ready to be added to a unit.